overwhelmed with the response. We've had so many people emailing questions. So we're going to try and cover the majority of topics today. So let me introduce myself. I'm not just some random woman that's talking to you on Google+. My name is Amy Bateman. For the last 12 years, I've been a commercial recruiter. So I specialise in finding opportunities for job seekers and helping people sell themselves and promote themselves. And I run a website called careercake.com. My two favourite things, careers and cake. And I'm joined by some fabulous panellists today. Firstly, I'm with Chris Humphrey. Chris actually runs Jobs on Toast, which is a website which specialises in finding fulfilling careers for people that have masters, PhDs, postgrads. So hi, Chris.
Hello.
Hi there. We're also with Claire Jones. Claire's from Nottingham University. Delighted. She works massively within careers. So delighted to have you here. Hi, Claire.
Hi, Amy.
And Iona, I want to... Could you say your surname?
Yes, it's Iordanu.
Hi, Amy. Beautiful. Hello. And you're from Warwick Business School. Really excited. I've been following you on Twitter for a little while, so really excited to have you with us. And then we've got Nadine Muller from one of my favourite universities, Liverpool John Moores. I do loads of work with. I'm up there next week, actually. And I know that you're a lecturer there, aren't you, in English literature? Yeah. So can you guys just tell me, and for all of the viewers, why you wanted to take part today, and why this is so important for you to add value? Chris?
Yeah, sure. Well, I've got a PhD myself, and I also did a postdoctoral fellowship. And I'm someone who's gone on to have a successful career in business after leaving academia. I work as a project manager in financial services. And I'm really passionate about these two options. So especially to understand their non-academic opportunities and options that they can take. And Jobs on Toast. I really want to help people and show them the full range of career options open to them. And so I write articles, for instance, around subjects like identifying transferable skills and how to market yourself to a non-academic employer.
Yeah, I'm so excited about you being involved today because you left academia in 2000 and you know what it's like to be, you know, that person that's going into the private sector, that commercial environment. So I know that you're going to be able to help loads today. So thank you, Chris. And Claire, why did you want to get involved today?
Okay, Amy. Well, the easy answer would be that it's my job as a careers professional working with researchers, but I'm more concerned with the belief that PhDs are a really talented group of people and they have a breadth of attributes, qualities and skills to offer to a range of careers. And I'm involved in today's event because it's about assisting them to value that themselves, and then to be able to convince others that they've got so much to offer.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, Ona. What made you want to go, right, do you know what, I want to be involved in this today?
Oh, I'm always excited about these sort of opportunities. I think I'm sort of halfway through between Chris and Claire. I left academia, left after my PhD in 2008, not, you know, wanting to hear anything about it. And about a year ago, I joined academia again, and I love it. So, you know, I've been outside and I'm now back in. Quite delayed, I would say. So hopefully I'll be able to add some value to this particular conversation.
Oh, no, certain. And Nadine, I know you are very prolific on if that's the right word, on Twitter. You're always sharing really interesting stuff, and I know that this is something you're really passionate about.
Yes, it is, and I think particularly because I'm an early career researcher, so I managed to get my job. I started it 6 months after I finished my PhD, but it's been 1.5 years now that I've been in that post, and I think I still have these really vivid memories still of that anxious kind of time when you finish your PhD and you need that job. You can't pay your bills without that job, and what do you do? Where do you go? And I'm really, really conscious that not everyone gets this kind of advice that hopefully we can kind of help with here, for example, from their supervisor. So I think it's really important that we make this wider available, really.
Yeah. And we're going to cover, for you, those of you watching, we're going to cover quite a lot of areas today because you asked us to. You want to cover such things as, you know, what's important during your PhD, but we also want to talk about, I know a lot of you have asked about interviews. How do you stand out from the crowd? How do you manage doing your PhD as well as, you know, doing that job, you know, doing that, all of that job hunting? So the first question, let's get straight in. The first question is actually from Laura Cocker, which is on Google+. So hello, Laura. Laura's actually said, let's have a little look here. She basically is saying she'd like to know what concerns industry employers have about newly qualified PhD students in science, and how I can help improve my employability to industry after academic training. Do you want to start with that, Claire, actually, because within a careers capacity, that might be something that you could touch on firstly?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Laura. I think the concerns that industry have about PhDs, about newly qualified PhDs, two things probably, about perhaps being now extremely narrow, because the way the PhD is that you look at something very specifically. So it's maybe about thinking of yourself as a broad scientist again and going back into the breadth and depth of your background in science. And also probably the other area is commercial awareness. What are the differences in working practices, in pace of work? There's some perhaps views in industry where, whether they're right or not, that you can take 3 years, 4 years to work on one project, and their pace of work and the range of things they want you to do is more more varied. So I think anything you can do that makes sure that you're showing that you're interested in commercialization of science, that you get involved in activities, young entrepreneurs schemes, anything to do with things that are going to improve your commercial awareness, I think would put you in a good position.
Do you have anything to add to that, Chris?
I was going to suggest that you could look to do some informational interviews with people who were already scientists who were working in industry or business.
Absolutely.
You could approach people and just work through a range of questions similar to what you've asked, and to help give yourself some good answers to that you can relay back to an employer, or if there's a kind of a gap between where you are and where you need to be, then that gives you a chance to work on that before you actually go in front of people and start applying for jobs.
Yeah, absolutely. What about you, Nadine? What are your thoughts?
Obviously, I don't really have a science background, but I do think what Claire said seems to really ring true from the students that I work with who want to branch out. So that idea of just awareness, I think, awareness of the other sectors, awareness of this kind of skills it takes, and also of the commercial side of things.
Would you have anything different to add to that, Iona, or is it pretty much?
Just one of the traps that we all fall as PhD students, try not to get lost in the solitude of the PhD. If you are interested in a career in the industry, it's very important that you are out there, that you're making connections, that you're speaking to people, and that ultimately you're showing that I'm not the lonely scientist, I am the industrial scientist.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important, and something that I talk to people when I'm working with people from all different sectors and industries, is that don't be defined by your qualification, don't be defined by your job title. You need to focus on building relationships, because ultimately people work with people, people hire people. I know that sounds really cheesy, but it's absolutely true, and I think it's really easy to forget that. You are more than your CV, you are more than your qualification, and if you put the time into building relationships, wonderful, beautiful, quality relationships with professional people, really solid professional relationships through online networking, through offline networking, then the opportunities will come. Surround yourself with people that are better than you. That's the best way to be better. And surround yourself with these relationships. Focus on that. If you just get on the internet and just think, right, I've got to find a job today, that's a complete head mess. Nothing will come from that. Nothing good will come from that anyway. You have to focus on, do you know what, this week I'm going to build 5 quality relationships with an influencer within my dream career. And if you build those relationships, guys, the opportunities will present themselves. We've got another question, actually, which is, I'm really interested to know this answer. It's from Thomas, who was a PhD researcher from London. And how to secure a career in academia, specifically whether to prioritise publishing articles versus books, what employers are looking for in addition to the PhD itself. Can I come to you on that, Iona, being sort of what your specialty is?
I would say that the important thing to know here is what is your discipline, and to understand what is the priority in your discipline. If, for example, you are doing something like arts and humanities, or sociology, politics, books, monographs are really important. And the employer will want to see that if you don't have one published yet, because clearly you're a PhD, that you're getting into that route of securing that book contract.
Okay.
If you're in an industry, in an area like I am, which is business, monographs don't count that much. It's articles that are more important. So I would say it's the combination of both, but find out what the priority is in your field of expertise.
Okay, that's really, really interesting. What do you think about that, Chris?
Publishing, I think, especially with the research assessment, those things are really important. That you have the publications, and that you have, especially like a research plan, not just of what you're publishing now, but a future vision, and how you're going to keep on with that level of output in the future.
Okay, and Claire, I know that you've done some surveys on this, haven't you, within academia? Do you want to join in there?
Yeah. We a group of fellow colleagues in the career services. We asked academics, what does it take to get your first lecturing job? Very small survey, but some interesting results. And this one around at least having publication plans.
Yeah.
If you're in postdoctoral careers and going in towards science, that you are publishing regularly, and then you're increasing from a consistent output to a quality output. So they're seeing development into higher impact journals. And so it's really about, for me, saying to PhDs, think ahead.
Yeah.
Look to the future. Don't be sort of sat back in your PhD and not considering the next 2 or 3 years, and building and moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And at the end of the day, these guys are doing a PhD, and it's not because they're scared of hard work. It's not because they're scared of pushing the boundaries and making sure that they're doing a lot of things that other people aren't doing. That's why they're doing this. So I'm certain that they'll be well up for that. Nadine, you got your role 6 months, and you're a lecturer 6 months after getting your doctorate. Do you have any? I mean, that's amazing. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, definitely. And I think, especially, I'm almost assuming this question comes from maybe the social sciences or humanities, simply because the monograph is mentioned in there. And so for us, the monograph really carries a lot of prestige still, especially I'm in English, particularly there, but in a lot of the humanities and social sciences, it carries a lot of prestige. The important thing to know is, I think, that if you look in terms of RAF terms, then it's important to know that actually a monograph that is rated the same as a journal in the end, that gets the same quality rating, is worth the same amount of money to the university. Okay. You get the same money for this if it's a 3-star, 4-star journal, or if it's a 3-star, 4-star monograph. So if you can publish in good quality journals, that's just worth as much, and probably easier to do during your PhD, without a question, than it is to publish a monograph. You will want to perhaps turn your thesis into a monograph afterwards, but you can get going with some quality journal articles beforehand. And the only thing I would say there is, as far as possible, target your journals wisely. Do aim high. You can still work your way down if you get rejected. It's perfectly normal. But this is really what people are going to be looking for, because if your work has been peer-reviewed in a very well-known journal, then that shows a certain amount of quality.
Thank you. Lots of nodding there as well from Iona. So thank you for that. Thomas, I hope that helps. I've got another question, and this is this question came up from so many people, and it's a question that I hear all the time anyway in lots of different industries. But how to actually comes from Mara, who's a PhD student from Southern England. How to identify the skills I learnt during my PhD that would appeal to employers. Now, this is always a tricky one because we're not always great at looking at ourselves as a product. And we have to, because recruitment is a sales process. Both people are buying, both people are selling, you're buying into each other, and it's a real task for people to sit down and think, oh my goodness, what am I good at? What is my value? Especially if you've been rejected in the past, you know, just because your value doesn't decrease just because somebody failed to see it. But I think sometimes we can feel like that, certainly job seekers that and graduates that I work with. What tips would you give to people to think, do you know what have I got? What transferable skills? What can I offer to an employer? And Chris, I'm going to come to you first on this, because I know this is a huge passion for you. And Christy, I know that you speak to lots of people about this. So what would you say to Marwa?
Yeah, I mean, like I say, it's an area that I'm really interested in, especially as I find that people haven't always got the awareness of skills that they've got. But one of the exercises I go to a campus and talk to graduate students is actually do a little skills audit with them and actually take them through a process of identifying even about 20 skills that a typical PhD has. So you can look in the area of project-related skills. So PhDs have managed a project, which is their thesis, and they've delivered that. Or you could look at ICT skills that they've got, research skills, networking, organising events. So I've worked through with people a list of about 20 skills, and you really see those sort of light bulb going off in their head as they sort of tick off. Oh yeah, actually I have got that. Oh, I have got that. And as you can actually, people are really sort of energized by thinking, oh yeah, I didn't realize that I could do all those things. But that's a great list to then go to an employer with and say, look at all these things I can do for you. Yeah,
I also think as well, I agree with that so much. I think it's really important that you look outside to sort of the networking and all that kind of stuff and events, that type of thing. But if anybody's struggling with that, ask your best friend, ask somebody that you've worked with, ask for references, ask for testimonials from people. And if you are going to ask for references and testimonials, or you are going to seek advice from people that you've worked with before, don't just say, what are my best bits, because that's a very open-ended question. Go to people and say, what problem did I solve for you? What would you say is my key? If there was a situation that I needed to help you with, what would that situation be? And that's a great way for you to actually then gather information that you can also use on your LinkedIn. You can whack in a fabulous testimonial on your CV rather than just put references available on request. You could put a reference there. But I think it's important that ultimately employers are hiring. They're hiring while you get out of bed in the morning. They're hiring if you have a really bad day on Monday and you're going to rock in on Tuesday. If you've got a deadline, you've got this massive big report that I need you to do, and you're late, are you going to sit there and deal with it, or are you going to go and have a cigarette and get in a strop? There are so many things. When I've recruited for nearly 5,000 positions in so many different companies, and the person with the most experience doesn't always get the job. It's the person that believes what the employer believes. So think about what your motivators are. Think about what your values are: honesty, integrity, passion, hard work, helping others be the best they can be. Think about yourself in terms of those things rather than, well, I've done this, I've done. Think about your why you do what you do, not just what, because the best people don't buy into somebody because of just what you do. It's why you do it too. And Claire, I know that you've done a lot of stuff like this, haven't you, with the sort of behaviours and qualities. Can you add on that?
Yeah, sure, Amy. I think for me it's about getting people to really value the breadth of things that they do. It's the how they work, who they work with, how they interact with them. So I actually talk to PhDs about thinking about not the end product of their work, which is in academia. It's usually what we focus on and what we almost define our success by. How many articles, what we were talking about in the previous question. And for many employers outside that, they want to know the process, how you got there,
how you dealt with a difficult situation,
how you negotiate. I was working with some PhDs yesterday on our skills conference here at Nottingham, and we were talking. They said, we communicate. And I said, how do you communicate? What situations do you do? What types of communication do you use? you know, when you're working with your supervisor, you're trying to influence and negotiate with them, and they all laugh. But that's true. They might not always win that argument, but those are the sort of skills that and qualities and behaviours that well, actually, you need as an academic as well. But, very, very much more obvious presentation of that for those people who are thinking of careers outside. And it also gives clues to the individual about what they really like doing, exactly what you said, you know, what drives you, what motivates you, what you like, what you want to do in most of your working day, because you spend a lot of time there.
Yeah, absolutely. And Iona, what do you think about, I know that a lot of people came through and said, look, doing a PhD is a massive amount of work. How do I balance the job hunt at the same time?
That is a difficult one, and I think it's difficult because, I mean, from my personal experience as a PhD student and from many of my friends and my colleagues, you get lost in the PhD. You get so intertwined in that bubble that it's very difficult to look beyond the boundaries of the PhD. So the important thing for me, and I know it sounds a cliche, is basically to understand your priorities and to manage your time. And why am I saying that? Because if you understand, for example, that the priority for you is to get, let's say, a postdoctoral fellowship, then that PhD eventually will need to start to be considered as, okay, what are the publication outcomes of it? When do I need to start planning, writing, or disseminating or presenting? So I think the issue with managing, with balancing the PhD and the job search is not an issue of time. It's an issue of I'm overwhelmed. So it's about breaking it down to smaller compartments and saying, okay, I'll focus on this, but I also need to set some time aside to start looking, networking, asking, finding what I need to do. So that's what I would say from my personal experience.
Yeah, and I just want to bang the point in again. Don't think so much about, you know, I'm doing this PhD, I've got to find a job. Just think I'm doing this PhD and I'm going to focus on building relationships, because that's not so overwhelming. You know, if you send somebody an article that might be of interest to them, or you're building a relationship with somebody on Twitter who could actually really influence your career, you could send them an article and go, I saw this today and thought of you. Give, ask. That's what I always say. You have 3 touch points. You give before you ask for an opportunity. But once you do that, and if you manage that well and just focus on building these relationships and adding value to people and making people feel special, then when it does come to the time when you need that opportunity, there will be so many more people that will be willing to help you. Nadine, how did you find that? Because I know that you got your role really quickly. Were you focusing on that while you were doing your PhD?
I was doing all sorts of things next to my PhD, and so in that sense, my PhD was really just something I needed to do to get to the next step, and I try to see it like that because it takes the pressure off a little bit as well. I had to remind myself every day that no one was expecting me to write a Nobel Prize winning speech or book or anything like this.
You mean you haven't done that?
Well, obviously, but that's still to come, in press.
That's tomorrow. Tomorrow.
But I think what's also really important when we come back to the practicalities is, depending on the career you're applying for, depending on the job, you may not be considered until you actually have your PhD. That doesn't mean, though, that it harms you to start trying, because one of the things you also need to get into the habit of is how to write applications. Because you don't want to do that once the pressure is on, once you've finished and don't have a job. You want to start practicing that, ideally without pressure. Just think to yourself, okay, this is a job that I would apply for. I may not stand a chance right now, but I will actually get the application together, because you'll be surprised how long it takes to get all those narratives together, to tidy up your CV, to make it relevant for that particular job. So get into the habit of that beforehand, when the pressure is maybe not yet on, just so you got something to draw on, some experience to draw on when you actually get there, when it counts.
That's such good advice. So yeah, guys, get practicing on those applications. That's really good advice. Chris, can I come to you with this question? Because again, this is a really popular question, and I know that this is of relevance to lots of people. this comes from Ahmed, who's a postdoc researcher in the UK. How to convince an employer that you are not overqualified. And this is really interesting because my best friend, who's got her doctorate, I sat with her for a long time, about 2 years ago, when she got her first role, and this was an issue for her, that you are not overqualified and only interested in this job as a stepping stone until something better comes along. Now, obviously, if it's a position that is very obviously just a stepping stone, that's a very different issue. But if it's and we can obviously address that later, but if this is a position that you really, really want to get, and you are not using this as a stepping stone, but that person doesn't believe you, Chris, what advice would you have to somebody going through that situation? Because that could be really frustrating.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing I say is often these kinds of fears can be in your own head, not necessarily how the employer's looking at you. But anyway, it is quite important to be able to get over them. I mean, I think the piece of advice I give to everybody is to not sort of think of yourself as a PhD, but think of yourself as a professional X, and within that X, in your own sort of phrase. So are you a professional researcher, a professional marketing expert, a professional diversity consultant, professional translator, and actually really sell yourself and present yourself as a professional. So in that way, everything else that you've got actually supports that professionalism. The PhD is just one example of that. And so anyway, that's usually my advice to people who are thinking this way, is to actually try and prevent your thinking and actually really communicate your value.
Yeah, because it could be in your head. You're absolutely right. I think most of our limiting beliefs are in our head. Back on, I'm going to take this up if that's okay. So firstly, I would say that you are not overqualified. You are exactly qualified. And there is no problem telling somebody that, do you know what? Interesting that you do think that I'm overqualified. That's really interesting. But I would say, and I genuinely believe, that I'm exactly qualified. I'm perfectly qualified, not overqualified, perfectly qualified. And I think sometimes that it's so much more than the position. And you have to remember that. It's the organisation. It's the team that you're going into. It's so much more than just the job and the job duties and the bullet points and, you know, all that kind of stuff. Now, in an application form, you can often have the opportunity to talk to somebody about why you're applying. It could be that you are building a relationship with them beforehand, or you've got the opportunity to submit a cover letter. Tell them why you want to work for them. Yeah. Don't make them feel like, and this happens all the time, don't make them feel like you've just filled in 5 application forms this week, hoping that somebody gives you an interview. Because that's a real problem, because you know, you want to feel special and valued, and so do employers, so do, you know, recruiters, so do organisations. They want to give the opportunity to the person that wants it the most. So when you go to these networking events and you meet with people and they just talk about themselves, we've all met people like that, haven't we? Me, and you think they're gonna ask me about me in a minute, and they don't. That's very much what employers feel like when you send them cover letters and application forms and you don't mention anything about how much you want it. Because it's them. Make them feel like right now you are the only person that I really, really want to work for. They will know that's not true, and it's completely cool. But if you want somebody to be genuinely interested in you and to overlook the thought that you might be overqualified, you have to make them feel like you are genuinely interested in them too. I'm not saying you need to look desperate by any means, but you need to make them feel special. So when you're writing a cover letter, don't start with why somebody should pick you. Start with why you pick them, because if you really want to get somebody's attention, you need to start with them. So tell them why, and give them an emotive reason, not just regurgitating something you've seen on their website or something that, you know, is in their mission statement, or, you know, Google them. I saw an article that you wrote, or I saw something that you had published, and I've thought it, and it's been an inspiration to me since, or it helped me through, you know, my PhD. Make them feel special. And all of these other things, like overqualified, all these other things that, or not experienced enough, all of these other things won't necessarily matter so much. And that's from my experience. What would you think about that, Iona?
Yeah, exactly the same, because I've been in this situation. I've been in this situation quite recently, and for quite a prolonged amount of time, where I thought, oh, you know, I'm not getting anywhere because I'm overqualified. And actually, that's not it. It's exactly what you said. It's about, you know, showing your passion for the role, showing how interested you are, and making sure you don't look desperate. Making sure that basically the employer doesn't see you are one of the 5 applications I've sent out today, basically. And I think this is where we get it wrong as PhD graduates. Sometimes we so desperately want a job that we end up applying to so many different places, but the interest, the enthusiasm, the passion, it just doesn't come out.
And it's easy to lose that when you're doing
Absolutely.
application after. It is easy to do that. How would you advise, Nadine, that you keep all of that positivity going? Because that's a question that did come through, actually. That's a question that came through from Jennifer. And Jennifer sent, she's actually over in the States, and Jennifer sent that how to stay positive and motivated during your job search. What would you say for that, Nadine?
I think, especially when it's academia, it can be really tough, and obviously in other sectors at the moment it's really tough as well. I think the important thing is to remind you what you actually want to do and why, and how much time you have just spent preparing for that. And I think also what I tend to tell people is learn to value yourself during your PhD. It's very, very easy that people just think you're just indulging, you're just writing for 3-4 years and you're doing nothing of value. Yeah. And what we don't do enough, I think, especially in academia, is actually remind people that their work is valuable, they are valuable beyond what they do. And you need to have that during your PhD, because otherwise it just gets tougher to value yourself once you're out there looking for a job. And I think that's really important. Just to add to what you said earlier about covering letters, and, you know, it's not just about you. It's also always about the other side, especially in academia. You know, when you do write a covering letter there, you're going to have to talk about the institution, the department, the people who already work there. Why do you want to work with them? Why are you a good fit? And that, I think, also reminds you that it is about you and how you fit into that picture. And sometimes it's really difficult to keep that in mind in academia, but the right job is probably the one you get, because it has to be a department where you fit in as a person, as a researcher, with your field and what you work on. So, you know, keep that in mind when you're looking, and remember how many people are out there. It's not because you're rubbish, which is often the first kind of conclusion we tend to draw when we get another rejection. That's really not the reason.
I love that. I love what you said about, you know, remembering the value in yourself. I really love that. And I think that a quick thing that I always teach people to do is something that I actually do personally myself, because obviously I work up by myself, and, you know, keeping yourself, that self-esteem all the time, you know, especially when you're on your own all the time. Surround yourself with lighters. And lighters are people that make you feel incredible, people that make you feel like you can take over the world, and everything will be fine. And even I know that you can get quite sort of it's quite an introvert thing to do when you're doing a PhD. And I think it's really important that you spend time with people regularly that do make you feel good about yourself. What do you think, Claire?
Absolutely. I think some of the time in academia, I don't have a PhD. When I start to work with PhDs, I thought they would be a super confident group of people, and I would be almost sort of pulling them down a little bit. But actually, it's the other way around, and much of my job is boosting their confidence. So the more that they're around people who do say, yes, you're good at this, and they say that to themselves, and that's one of the benefits of Chris's sort of skills exercise and so on, is, you know, just actually looking at what you have achieved each day, what you do, and saying, I did that well. You know,
you're not like Claire. Claire, you're not like that.
In terms of employers viewing you as overqualified, I think there is actually something where PhDs have to recognise that they are an unknown quantity, they're a career changer. So there might be some legitimacy to that feeling that, are we getting the right person? We don't quite know, they're coming from somewhere different. So it's about, again, that translation of your experience into the language and the vocabulary and the setting of that organisation.
Ask everybody's thoughts on this, because this is something that I hear a lot, but I want to go with you on this one. Somebody, Eleni, who's on Google+, so hi Eleni, she's actually said that some people have told her to leave her PhD qualification off her CV when applying for non-academic jobs. She disagrees. She's saying, I disagree with this, but what do you think? Eleni, thank you. That's an amazing, I've even gotten great question. Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a question I've heard many times before. I mean, I think the key thing to me is to think about your PhD as employment. I mean, you can even think of yourself as a self-employed researcher. So what I encourage people to do is actually think of your sort of your period at university as sort of being your undergraduate, and maybe if you did a master's. But after that, a PhD is a job. You know, it's 3 or 4 years that you're working at that. So what I suggest to people is put that in the employment section. But don't necessarily say just PhD itself, but actually talk a bit more about what you did, like you ran a research project to deliver, I don't know, a patent or a particular output or piece of research. So talk about it in terms of a job and not in terms of just like studying or a qualification.
I absolutely love that advice. I'm going to be borrowing that to give to people when they ask me that question. Yeah, it's absolutely, and put it into the employment section. And yeah, what do you think about that, Nadine? Did anybody ever tell? Well, I suppose it might have been a bit different for you because you were going into an academic role. But have you ever heard? Do any of your friends? Has anybody ever said that they've had to do that or thought about doing that?
Yes, definitely. Definitely, especially when we talk about, you know, are there any options in terms of just going into admin, for example, whilst we're looking for another job? I have lots of friends who said, I only go up to A level, maybe even GCSEs, and not even mention the degree, the PhD, any kind of postgraduate qualification. Obviously, for my career trajectory, and I haven't done much else, I have to confess, so I'm not of much help there, but of course, I would never leave the PhD off my CV because it's absolutely crucial.
Does anyone else have any points to make on that?
Yeah. Claire, you can go first, absolutely.
And I was just going to say, I really dislike the view that people would leave off such an important
I know. I heard you gasp.
Part of their life.
As I read the question, you gasped.
Yeah. It's also, again, I would echo Chris. I would say, you know, sometimes it's about creative titling in your CV, current role. You don't want to put employment.
And that goes back to what Chris was saying earlier again about, you know, the professionalism of it and thinking of yourself. My advice would be, don't ever do that. Don't ever devalue what you've done to make yourself smaller so that somebody else will accept you. I think that, and if that's the type of environment, then you need to really think about whether or not you're going to be happy there. And I completely get that you need to earn money. I get that, and I know that. Trust me, I've got enough friends and family. I spend every day with people that are struggling to find employment, and that's the one thing that I don't think that you should negotiate on ever. We've got another question. And this question is actually from Deb. So hi, Deb. Deb's actually on Google Plus now, so she's watching. So hi, Deb. Deb's question, and I think that Nadine can answer this actually first, if that's okay. A question on priorities. What would you say the relative weight is for publications in pipeline versus teaching experience at interviews for lecturing posts? What do you think? Can I go to you first, Nadine?
I think if you're talking about lecturing posts, then especially, I mean, I think it says postdoc/lecturing post, but if we're talking about permanent lectureship, people will be hiring you to take on a teaching load. That might be 2 modules per semester, it might be 3, it might be 4, depending on the kind of university you apply for. So there is an expectation, especially in the competition that we're at the moment with all the other applicants, that you have shown that you can teach. So teaching, I think, is absolutely crucial. Get it in there whilst you can. The important thing to remember is that if you're offered 5 different seminar groups for one core module, that's still only 1 line on your CV. So try and get the range in there. Try and demonstrate that you could teach different periods, things that maybe aren't in your research specialism, because you're always going to have to do that when you get your first job. It's very unlikely that someone will offer you a lectureship where you only teach 2 specialist modules that fall exactly in what you want to do and what you have done in your PhD. And in terms of splitting your attention, I know there is always the idea that, oh my God, if I pay too much attention to other things, will I write a passable PhD? And of course, the PhD is at the center of things, because without that, you're certainly not going to get the lectureship. But the other fact is that only your PhD is also not going to get you it. So the teaching is definitely a factor, definitely publications in the pipeline or even out. And I think the most important thing that people say, on the one hand, people always try to be nice and say, well, you have to show the potential for publication. But of course, that's become slightly unrealistic if you look at the amount of people who are applying for the same job with you who have publications out, who may even already have a monograph on the contract. Mm-hmm. So if you're there saying, one article accepted, you know, I'm just making the revisions, that's probably not going to cut it. So I would always say during your PhD, don't publish everything you have, okay? Yeah. Wait, discuss with your supervisor, is this good quality, this particular chapter? Might this make it into a journal, and send it off? Not least, not just for the career directory, but also to get used to the sometimes ruthless feedback you can get. Okay. So I think look at the job specs for academic job posts and see what you can tick off during your PhD. Don't just wait until afterwards because the pressure's too great and the time too little.
Okay, thank you. I want to ask Claire, if you could, because we don't have a massive amount of time, and there's another question that I want to get in before we go. But Claire, is there anything you wanted to add to that briefly?
Yeah, just only to put there are some discipline differences. So some of the sciences, engineers, technologists may not actually have the same opportunity to teach in postdoc, and the expectation that they have done a lot of teaching before they apply for their first lectureship, maybe not quite as high as in the arts and social sciences. So just to put that perspective, really,
Thank you.
Don't worry if you're a scientist, but try and do some things.
Great point. So before I go to everybody with their final thoughts, really, their final tip, I want to go. I want to ask one more question, because this question's actually come from Stephanie, who's a PhD student from the Midlands. Stephanie's sent this through, and basically, when I graduate, I will need paid employment straight away. She wants to temp. She's worried, and I get it, she's worried that if she has temporary work elsewhere, and she puts that on her CV, that will be looked upon unfavourably by an interview panel if it's a temporary work outside of the skill set academic. What do you think, Chris?
I agree it's a tricky question, but sometimes you just have to do what you have to.
Yeah.
And so I wouldn't be, I mean, something that I did when I finished my PhD, I handed in on a Thursday, on the Monday I went straight into a temp job.
Yeah.
Because I had no choice in terms of, you know, finances. I had to work. So I personally wasn't ashamed of that, or you know, or didn't try and cover that thing up. But would be other people's thoughts on that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as a recruiter, obviously I sell people to companies and organisations every day, and I've yet ever to find somebody worth working with that thinks that going out in a temporary position is sitting at home would have been better. I think that goes back to what I said earlier, what we were all saying earlier actually, which is about you are so much more than your qualification, your values, your motivators, and if being out there shows a lot about your character, you're prepared to do something that doesn't ultimately make you happy, but you're going to do it because you know you need to do it because it can help you. It's the reason why I'm in a position to be able to sit here with you today, Mr. Interviewer, Mr. Group, because I did go out and do that. So I was able to pay my bills so that I can sit here with a company, with an organisation, with a university that I would love to work for and look them in the eye and be proud of it. So that's my little thoughts on that. We are going to have to wrap up, I'm afraid. I know that I want to say that there's lots and lots of questions that we had through, and I know that we don't have a massive amount of time, and we have absolutely loved having everybody with us today. There are going to be lots of additional posts and things through jobs.ac.uk on Twitter and Google+, so make sure that you follow those guys there. And on the website as well, there are lots of amazing careers blogs, so there's lots of people that are advising and writing articles that will help you with certain situations and key topics. And we're also going to be putting a lot of the links to a lot of the issues that have been raised today and further reading and all that kind of stuff underneath the video as well. So guys, I just want to ask you, is there, your final thoughts on today, really? And if there's one thing that you felt that you wanted to say that you didn't get the opportunity to say, that final sort of words of wisdom, I suppose. And I'm going to come to you first, Nadine, on that. The final bit of tip, advice for somebody watching.
I think the final tip, especially for your early career, is don't think of yourself as inferior because you are early career, because you are just a postgraduate. Try to show people what you have to offer. Just because you haven't published that book yet, that means you may have potentially 2 books for the next ref cycle. Treat it as that. Try and show the potential that you have, the enthusiasm that you have, and what you can do. Don't approach the situation as if you're kind of begging for something that you're not entitled to. You're perfectly qualified, so go for it. And make sure you make the right decision in terms of what you think is right for you, and then go after it, no matter what people say.
Go after. I love that. I love that. Iona?
Yeah, building on to from what Nadine said, I would say exactly the same thing. A PhD is a wonderful asset to have. It's a great project that you've done on your own, that you've managed on your own. Don't underestimate it. For me, 2 important things. 1, understand what it is and learn how to, first of all, communicate the value of your PhD to yourself, most importantly, and then you will be able to communicate it to others. But most PhD students, where they get it wrong is they cannot communicate the value of what they're doing to themselves. And I think that's where all the wrong starts.
So when it's why you,
exactly.
and not, and
exactly. And then you will be able to say this to others as well. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Claire?
Following very much on from Iona, believe in yourself. If you don't believe in yourself, you can't convince other people to believe in you. And if there's support around for you at your university and career service and so on, and not everybody has specialist support, but please use it and use your academic colleagues as well.
Yeah, thank you. Chris?
Yeah, I mean, just building on what everyone else has said, I mean, to me, the most important thing is to have a story for why you're making the transition out of academia. It's no good just getting to the end of a PhD and then saying, oh, I've kind of run out of things to do. You've got to have a persuasive and powerful story that communicates, yeah, I've done this in my life, I fulfilled the challenge of getting a PhD, and now I'm ready for the next challenge, and that's why I want to come and work for you.
Okay. Thank you. Nadine, was there one thing that you wanted to quickly add?
Yes, very close to my heart. No matter what industry you want to go into, if it's academia, if it's another sector, please remember that we're all in the same boat when we come out of that PhD. Don't think of each other as competitors, as enemies. Think of it as a network that you can draw on for support, please, because we're only making things worse otherwise, I think, and playing into other people's hands. So remember that.
And that leads on to my final thought, which is relationships, relationships, relationships. Start building those relationships and quality relationships as soon as possible, and the whole process of job hunting will be so much easier. So, okay, great. Well, I just want to say just links to all and other articles related to issues that have been brought up today will be posted and will be available shortly after the end of this broadcast. But guys, it's been an absolute joy. An absolute joy, and thank you so much, and I hope for you watching that you've got a lot of value out of this, and I know the guys at jobs.ac.uk were really keen to do this for you, so thank you so much and have a lovely afternoon. I'll see you on social media, I'll see you on Twitter.
Absolutely.
Thank you everyone.
Bye.